either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird Shorts. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And it's been a while since we've done a short, since everything shut down and movie theaters aren't open, so...
Yeah.
It's
been kind of hard to watch new things, especially since a lot of the new ones that at least I was really excited for turned out to be a $20 fee, and I don't even spend that much when I actually go to the movie theater.
Yeah, or most of the ones I've wanted to see have been pushed back to next year at the earliest.
Yeah, I saw a lot of those too. Man.
So we decided we're going to do a little bit of a different route, and maybe something we'll look at in the future. We decided to do a Netflix original movie.
Yes.
And
there was a lot of choices, but there was one clear choice for us.
Yes. And if I could play the overture right now without copyright infringement, I totally would.
Fair. But alas.
We can't. So we are doing Dragon Quest Your Story.
Yep. And this is a fun one because you've played the Dragon Quest games before.
I've played some of them. I did look it up just to see if it was based off anyone. This one specifically is an altered story of, I think they said, the 5th Dragon Quest.
Okay.
And I've mainly played, I think I played 7, 8, and then 10, or the newest one.
Yeah.
And then I have the first 3, but have only played part of the first one.
And I have only ever watched my friend's older brother play.
Okay.
Like the 7th one, I think.
PlayStation 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Journey of the Cursed King.
Yeah, that was my base knowledge for going in, was I kind of knew about Dragon Quest loosely, but I had never really played the games.
Yes, and that was actually the first Dragon Quest I played too. It was in a weird time because it was actually my brother's game and I got into it.
Nice.
And it was at a time where I was beating his games before he beat them. And it was annoying him, so I don't think he ever finished this one. But I didn't have I have no experience with the 5th game. I don't know too much about it.
And normally there's kind of two camps with the video game based movies that these usually tend to fall into. There's the over explaining every part of the video game lore and history so that you can understand the story. Or there's the overly simplified one where nobody needs to actually know what's going on, which works for people like me, but then usually the fans of that game get kind of pissed off. Yeah,
and for me, especially this one, I'm kind of at an in-between because, let's be honest, the Dragon Quest games are the later ones are easily 70 to 100-hour games.
Yeah.
And this story, very much, if you've never played a Dragon Quest, it has almost all the elements you want there, and it just quickly glosses over a lot of story aspects.
Yeah. And I think I liked this one because it did give me a better sense of what, especially since this is based off of a specific Dragon Quest, it was nice that as long as you knew that this is based off a video game, you could tell which parts, even though they had done so in a storytelling way, were things that could have been an option for a player. Yeah. So, like, example...
The love interest
and all that. Like, I always knew that that Dragon Quest was a multiple path game. That you could, somewhat choose where you were going to go.
Open world, but all the ones I've played, it's not real. There's not those options.
Yeah.
It's what you're talking about for me is more like Chrono Trigger, where you can technically beat the game at the very beginning.
Sure. Okay, I see what you mean. It was kind of nice that they hinted at all of the elements that the game had, so that people who did know the game would have stuff to recognize, and then also debate whether or not that was accurate to whichever version of the game they liked, versus people like me who, it just kind of gave me an idea of how the game normally would be played.
Yeah.
Or at least the storyline for the game.
Yeah, and that really is how the storylines generally go. There's a lot of plot twists. There's just a lot of stuff crammed into this movie.
Yes.
And I think, for me, that's kind of one of the rough points, is I feel the movie might have been a bit too ambitious in that regard, that they were trying to cram that long of a story into one movie.
This movie definitely had... It had a bit of an odd pacing, which, like you said, they crammed a lot in here. So it kind of had to have a weird pacing. Otherwise, you're just not going to have everything.
Yeah, because I would say about half the movie feels like what would have been like the backstory. If I had no information about the Dragon Quest series itself, half the movie would have felt like it would have been a backstory or what could have been a prequel. And then something happens halfway through that I felt would have been like where the movie probably would have begun, or like a JRPG would have began with like, oh, now this character will have a mysterious background, but we don't need that mysterious background because we know this character's entire history up until that point.
Yeah, and I could see the argument for making this movie into like a 2-part or 3-part movie, or even a little mini series where, like, we've seen a lot of Netflix do this, where it's a series, it's a TV show, but each episode's like an hour and a half long. I kind of wish this had gone one of those routes, just because there was a lot of stuff all at once. But one of the things that saved this movie is its character designs. I did not struggle at all to differentiate the characters.
That was very good too, but I am not 100% a fan of them, just because Dragon Quest, for those who don't know, especially people who aren't into video games or anime or manga, it's been all the characters have been designed by Akira Toriyama, who did Dragon Ball, Dr. Slump. He did everyone, but they changed it for the animation.
Yes, and they changed it, and honestly, I think most of the characters, I liked the tweaks they did with them. Because if they had left them the original art style, it wouldn't have felt right. It would
have felt too much like a video game.
Yeah, and so they fleshed out the characters and they gave interesting visual points that helped with that character's storytelling and their development for the most part. There was a couple of places where the DBZ influence was a little strong. I'm thinking specifically of Cleft Chin Man, aka the main bad guy.
Yeah.
His chin, like, everything in this world is obviously, it's very fantasy, it's, very over the top, sky's the limit, but that man's chin is just too long.
And, I mean, that's... I can see where you're getting with that, because all the other characters feel more realistic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the villain's very monster-like.
Oh no, like, he's a good character design. That's not my complaint. It's just everyone else in the world is, for the most part, very standard looking.
Yeah.
And and I'm not saying that everyone needs to look the same in the movie, that's not the point, but a good example is Jafar in Aladdin.
Yes.
Where, he's still within the confines of a standard people, he fits in with the crowd, and honestly, if he didn't wear the weird hat, he probably would blend in okay.
Yeah.
But they've given him certain features to make him a bad guy, whereas this one, he's the only one who's got really out of proportion features.
Yeah.
And so while being an entertaining character design, I think he was the main sticking point visually for me in this film. Okay. The rest of it looked pretty good. Yeah, there's a couple places where the CGI wasn't great. And there's a couple places where the computer models they're either too heavy or they're too light. Yeah. But for the most part, you don't notice that sort of stuff. And it ran pretty smoothly.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know if... I don't consider myself a purist for animation, just because I know there's a lot of people who are in the camp of, it needs to be traditional, or they're not a huge fan of 3D animation. And I first had an issue with that. I think it was when I tried watching Ruby.
Ruby was a divisive 3D.
Yes, and some of this movie falls under that for me too, where... And I've talked to a few people in regards to this, and there's it's a loss of translation between mediums. Yeah. When we were watching Priest, there was that loss of translation. It's whenever they have like the super matrixy jumps. Yes. In an action fantasy that has like that translation error where movement in anime, like when the Full Metal Alchemist brothers, they wave their arms and there's that blurred line between them.
Yeah, they turn into little mush balls.
That stuff doesn't translate that well into 3D. And at the same time, since I know it's a computer and it's cartoon. Part of me wants there to be like real physics to it, but some of that doesn't translate well either. Like, specifically what got me the first time was when he's running in the desert from the golems, and he does that like little kick jump, and it's like, that doesn't... It
didn't read quite how I wanted it to.
Yeah. It's just it's a different medium, and I'm used to it in a different kind of context.
Yeah, I do think though that Dragon Quest tried pretty hard while still wanting to maintain its anime roots. It did, for the most part, try really hard not to fall too hard on the anime tropes. There's a lot of over emotion exuded in most drawn animes, and it doesn't read weird because we're all used to it.
Yeah.
And then also, you know that they're drawings trying to show a certain emotion, like being sad.
Yeah.
No one truly suddenly loses all their color and, like, droops over.
Yeah.
And so most of the time in this movie, it does a nice balance where you get some of the high energy. They do read the emotions of the faces really nicely. No one gets stuck with weird, real-life Lion King faces where everyone just kind of looks like they've had plastic surgery. But there were definitely parts where, you could tell that they didn't know how to express what they needed to.
Yeah.
And so I think, unfortunately, we just haven't reached a point in 3D CG anime films yet that will get us what we need. But I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
These are so much better than the old ones.
Yeah. Especially as, like, rendering engines and graphics get more advanced. Because, honestly, the fur in this movie is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. And 90% of the action felt really good in this movie too, which is something that's I've noticed gotten much better in the CG animation world. It originally always felt really floaty and fake, and everyone felt like they were like the gravity had been turned off on accident in certain parts.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, for the most part, everyone's jumps felt intentional. Their feet always felt like they connected with something most of the time. There's definitely a couple parts of this movie where something didn't quite connect.
Yeah.
I would say most of this movie looks great.
I agree too, and I think part of that, again, is that they deviated from Akira Toriyama style, because that's probably been my other issues too with other series, specifically another Netflix original, the Godzilla trilogy, where it's anime and they try and force a 2D image onto a 3D plane. And sometimes it doesn't translate super well, whereas this, because of its changing its stylization, it translates better.
Definitely.
And that's another thing, too, is calling this movie a Netflix original is interesting, because we're at a transition where we are getting foreign films, but they're being brought over as originals, because this movie was actually shown in theaters in Japan. Same with the Godzilla trilogy.
There's a scary amount, actually, of Netflix originals that they put the original on the title. It's original because Netflix is the only one showing it.
Yeah, they have the license to distribute it in the U.S.
Which, if that's how people get into this sort of stuff, awesome. Like, you gotta start somewhere. But I do kind of wish that there was a better understanding that the original in the Netflix original does not mean that Netflix is the one making these. No,
exactly. And part of my issue with that too, to get off on a little bit of a tangent, the movie, what was it? The Ritual, the one with the three friends who go into the woods in Sweden on the hike.
Oh,
yeah. You can't buy that on DVD in the US.
Yeah.
So you have to have Netflix to watch it.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of my rant and issues with the Netflix originals.
Yeah, there's a lot of rants and issues that we could go into, which maybe that's going to be a different side topic to talk about. But other than the character design and the renderings and general computer part of this, how did you feel about like the voice acting and the characters in general? Well,
I was going to ask you about that. What language did you listen to it in?
I originally tried to listen to it in Japanese. I can't say that I am good in Japanese though. And I found that it was a little bit too hard for me to keep up with what was happening. There's a lot of points where people were talking over each other and I lost sentences. So I switched back to the English version.
Okay. For me, I was fine with it. I generally don't have issues with Japanese voiceovers. And this one's an interesting one too, because I did a little bit of looking into it. They actually had the voice actors record their lines twice, similar to what they did in Akira, so that way the animation could match better.
Nice.
And then on top of that, they had them come back after the animation was done and try and fit. So that way they had the option of, okay, well, the mouth moves a little bit differently. Here's this change in inflection instead.
Okay.
I didn't have an issue with it. I did not listen to it in English.
With all English versions of things, there's always going to be a couple parts where the lip flap and the words just don't line up.
Yeah.
It's definitely gotten better. The old stereotype of foreign films where people are just not speaking and words are happening, that for the most part has ended. And people have gotten really good at extending the lip flaps where needed or squeezing in things.
A quick sentence.
Yeah. I will say, though, that if you're not familiar with listening to the Japanese version and reading the subtitle part, it was really entertaining to watch it in English and then have the captions on underneath, because the captions are translated from the Japanese script, not by what people are saying.
Yeah.
Which actually I felt really helped out, especially because I didn't know very much about Dragon Quest. There was a lot of bits that having a second version of a translation really flushed out a lot of questions I had at certain points. But I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for these kind of movies, watch it however you like. I've come to more of an understanding of, like, if you prefer the dubbing, then fine. Because, like, I tried getting my parents, I did get them to watch Django, the original Italian Django. And I'm like, I don't really like the American voice acting. Turns out the version I have has a better voiceover than the original one I watched. But, I don't know. I think it's, that's just a personal preference. Watch it however you want.
And I would say I remember when anime was not quite as popular as it is now, there really was a huge difference in translation. Honestly, there's not anymore. People who doing the translations have gotten so much better at knowing what the correct words and phrasing is to convey are. And so, especially with goofy, just for fun movies like Dragon Quest, it really isn't going to change anything. Now, with that said, some of the older ones, if you're going back to the 70s or early 80s, unfortunately, sometimes, it makes a huge difference to the plot because they just can't pronounce people's names or places or just leave entire conversations out.
Entire scenes.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Because Americans don't know or can't handle that onigiri is a rice ball. They have to familiarize it as a jelly donut.
Them jelly donuts made of rice. Pokemon. But not this one. This one, honestly, watch it however you're comfortable with. Watch it with or without subtitles. Watch it in English. Watch it in French. You're not going to miss anything.
Yeah. I actually have some questions for you in regards to some of the style and characters. Because I know you're not familiar with Dragon Quest and how punny and on the nose they can be. What did you think of some of the characters' names?
They were pretty good. I got most of them just because some of them are blatantly obvious. Example being the saber cat is named Percy. And especially if you watch it with the subtitles, he's got 2 R's in his name, which really emphasizes the part.
Percy.
Or Gertrude. They wanted to say Gertrude, but it's spelled Goo-trude, so occasionally it's just Gootrude. Because it's a slide. Because it's a goo.
Yes.
So, yeah, most of the names are really obviously a good pun. I'm used to seeing pun names, so I was able to, as I'm watching, pick up on a lot more of the punny names. If you're not used to it, you'll still get a chuckle out of a lot of them just because they are, for the most part, pretty obvious.
Yeah.
There are a couple of fun hidden ones that aren't nearly as straightforward, but you'll still probably get them if you're looking.
The one that I just realized, there's an old man in the movie called Dr. Agon. Or is that how they said it in English?
Yeah, I think they called him Dr. Agon.
Okay. spelled out, it's dragon.
It's dragon, yeah. And guess who's a dragon?
Dr. Agon. That's one thing I forget about this series from time to time, is that some of it is so punny. Like, I think it was in the 6th one, it was the 7th, because Cursed King is 8. So 8th is the one that we're familiar with, or both of us are somewhat familiar with. In the 7th one, there's a part where they're having a music contest, and I got through like 3 of the people showing up on the contest, and then the 4th one, it was Paige, and I'm like, oh, these are all famous famous guitarists. And sure enough, I went back and some of them are like, oh, this was the guitarist for ZZ Top, and so on and so forth. But I mean, that's the kind of humor that I felt translated pretty well from. Yeah, and honestly, it's not just the names. Like that humor was put in throughout all of the writing. So, example, names of spells, the way certain characters are responding to things. She can do Kassizzle, if you don't know the game series, Kassizzle is one of the most powerful fire spells. Yeah. There's a lot of just humor put into this story, which I think really does help a little bit with how cramped the pacing was. It did help that you kind of did get a little tiny bit of air for a good laugh here or there. Oh, hi, Charlie's tail. And the one thing I'm really glad that they still kept in, and this is one of Akira Toriyama's biggest contributions to the series, other than his artwork, is the reference to the Puff Puff. Puff Puff. Which, for those who don't know, was censored in the U.S. For the longest time. Originally, a Puff Puff is when a woman takes her breasts and massages a man's face with them. Like a powder poof. Yes, which has completely evolved in recent games. It has. From stuff like, generally it's a girl taking 2 slimes and rubbing a guy's face between it. Still very much on the nose of what it is. Yeah. But done with more humor. Yeah. And I like that little bit of weaving in the little bits of Dragon Quest funsies. And Easter eggs. Yeah. And this leads me to the story. And I don't want to spoil anything. Yes. But the overarching story, I was pleasantly surprised with. I was too. I don't want to spoil it either because... No, but I will say the first probably 3/4 of the movie, I wasn't sold. No. I thought it was okay, but I wasn't like wowed by it. It was the last fourth that really put this movie over the top for me. And honestly, this is one of those movies where we can't really break down its standard structure either, just because it's so heavily based off the game. It's all over the place, and like, oh, okay, well, that character made a big decision, so that's not the end of this act, or that is the end of this act. But it's for those who love video games and have specific video games they love, this movie is very nostalgic. Yeah. And it made me want to go back and replay some of my older games, and just it has a very touchy feely end to it. It does, and it did so in a way that, because other movies have touched on this subject before, and I will give this one props for, at least for the English version, being the best articulate in how they came across with the problem and then the solution that the main hero gives to the problem. Because a lot of other ones have done something similar, but every time it's come across as like a weak answer. Yeah. And this one gave a very compelling answer and conclusion to the movie. And I really liked that. It reminds me of another Netflix original, Gaunt's Zero. Yeah. Which I think your husband and Philip have both watched before knowing anything about Gaunt's. That sounds like my husband. Yeah. And even me going into it, I thought, oh, this is just a reimagining of it. No, it's that little, it's more. It's a little bit of a twist to it. Yeah. And honestly, that's what put this movie over the top for me, was the main overarching story that we see through 3/4 of this movie is very good. It's cute. It's funny. It's very traditional JRPG. Yeah. And if you're not familiar with a JRPG, you can still have some fun with it. And
And honestly, if it had just been that story, I wouldn't have been mad at it.
No.
I still would have had fun. I probably wouldn't have gotten anyone else to watch it, though.
No.
But the last little bit, boy, that was just a really good little cherry on top.
Yeah, it's the same boat for me, because we've talked about doing Final Fantasy VII Advent Children.
Yes.
And as much as I love that movie, I know it's not a good movie.
Yeah, no, it's not.
But it's a movie that requires so much back knowledge to, I guess, somewhat appreciate it.
Honestly, to even understand what's going on some points of the movie, which is part of the disappointment. If you're a really big fan of the Final Fantasy, it's not a good movie still. Yeah. But you at least have all of the background knowledge you need to enjoy the movie.
And for me, going into Dragon Quest Your Story is, I'm familiar with the Dragon Quest franchise, but not specifically this one. Yeah. And I think that's fine too, because I enjoyed it. I want to go and actually play the 5th one now. Yeah. Just to get more of the story, because I know they've left out so much.
I have no doubt. They left out a whole bunch of stuff, but I think they brought in enough that, yeah, even if you're not into Dragon Quest, you can still enjoy this one.
Yes. I agree with that. So, in the end, would you recommend giving this movie a watch at all?
If you like anime, and specifically the like medieval-esque fantasy anime, this is really fun to watch. I definitely recommend it. If you like JRPGs, this is another really good one. If you have a group of friends over, this would be a good group friend movie. There's so many puns, there's quite a bit of humor. This would be a lot like watching Dragon Ball as a group. Yeah. Where there's a lot to talk about over the movie or with the movie as it's going along.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, because I watch it alone. And if I had a group of friends over, I think I would have had more fun gushing over, like, my love for the franchise and say, oh, did you get that? Did you get that? Kind of thing.
Yeah, and I definitely have my group of friends where we normally watch, what we call dumb animes together. And Dragon Ball is one of the ones that we typically like. And there's a lot of similar storytelling elements that Dragon Quest movie has in common with that. And we would have had a really good time watching this together. And I honestly am probably going to make them all watch it with me later.
Yeah. Me, on the other hand, I would only, like you said, I would only recommend it to people who are kind of into it. Maybe get your kid into it. Yeah. But I wouldn't recommend this to someone like my parents. Yeah. Where, they'd probably enjoy it.
They'd put up with it because you're having fun with it.
Yeah, exactly. And even then, that's the thing is, like, it's the very end of that movie that makes it for me. Yeah. And it's that hour and a half that you have to get through to be like, okay, yeah, it's a fine.
Yeah, and honestly, you have to get through that hour and a half to make the last little bit really matter.
Yeah, exactly.
And so yeah, I get what you're saying. This, unfortunately, isn't one of the anime and game movies that I would say, yes, it's perfect for any audience. Yeah. No, this is, if you're in the nerd camp like us, this is a fun one to watch.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're like my mom and you really like your historic dramas, this is probably not it.
No, not at all. And even me, who's not, I don't watch a whole lot of fantasy movies either. This one. Yeah. It's
fun. I wouldn't put it very high on my list, though.
No, same here. So, but anywho, this has been the good, the bad, and the weird shorts.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.